As you can imagine, it would take several days to take the big trees down using primitive tools like that. Now, I read something down below in the gift shop, one of our books, and it talked about the double bit axe. How it would take several weeks to take the big trees down using just the axe. So that was a whole lot of time spent chopping that thing down like that. Nowadays, they can do it in a matter of hours with a modern chainsaw. Now, the Misery Whip, that's an appropriate name for that particular piece of equipment, especially if you don't know what you're doing. And, well, it can be misery. I know I've done it. I've played with them and it hurts, it's painful. You're sore the next day. Boy, are you sore. Now, on the other side of that coin, I've seen people in logging competition shows that'll take that Misery Whip and a log about this big around, and they can cut that log almost as fast as a modern chainsaw. Wow. They've got it down to a science how they do it. But then you got to figure that's hours and hours and hours and hours of practice to get it to where they can do it right. Me, I tried it for a little while and gave it up. I'll just grab a chainsaw if I want to cut something. Now, when they started making chainsaws, well, some of the chainsaws were fairly small because most of your fuel was done by drip. So if you had a saw that was set for a vertical cut, that's all it did was vertical cuts. If you tilted it over, it died. So once they figured the carburetor out, all bets were off. Chainsaws grew in size and power heads got heavier and larger to a point where some of these saws down here on the end from the 50s, they weigh 40 to 60 pounds. You imagine showing up at work and have your boss say, hey, okay, you got saw number 45. You look over, number 45's got a 6-foot bar about this wide with big gnarly chain like some of these things have. Compared to modern chain, that's monster size stuff. And then a power head about this big. Well, what that means is you get to grab that saw, put it up on your shoulder, grab the fuel, the oil, your water, and your most important thing for the day, your lunch. Then you get to go hiking up and down the hills to cut the trees. So it took a special kind of person to do that. And it still does take a pretty hardy person to do this logging thing. I mean, it was and still is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. I mean, Mother Nature, you can do everything perfectly right. Nature can throw a twist that quick into it that'll curl your hair. I know I've cut a few trees down and I've seen some very unusual things happen, like a big gust of wind come in after you've got it starting to move and it'll spin it right off the stump. Then you've got a loose tree and you got to stand there and wonder which way it's going to go until it commits to go in one direction. Then you can run at a 45-degree angle the other way. You can't take off running until it commits to where it's going, because you could wind up running right out under it. It's that simple. Now, once you got the trees cut, how do you get them up to a flat or a landing? Well, 1898, this was the machine for the job. This is a steam-powered yarder or a steam donkey. Now, this thing, as you can tell, weighs about 14,000 pounds. Keep in mind, this is actually a baby version. There are versions of this machine out there the size of a house. I wouldn't even begin to know what they weigh. I can tell you how these are moved, though. They hook a team of oxen up to it, they say mush, and away they go. There's no wheels under this thing. They skidded it. Now, once they got it up there and they're ready to start pulling timber, how do you communicate with your choker setter? And this is a choker. This is what you put around a tree or trees to drag it up the hill with. How do you communicate with that guy? He's a half mile down the hill. Well, back then they'd hire a young man, put him up in the top of a tree halfway between the choker setter and the operator of the equipment. His job title was whistle punk. His job, watch the choker setter. When the choker setter signaled that it was safe, then he'd signal the operator of the machine, they'd start pulling. Now, once they were done logging the entire mountaintop off, in a good portion of cases, not every time, but a good portion of the cases, at the end when they were done, they walked up and they'd go, well, you've earned your retirement, enjoy it. They'd walk off and abandon these machines up on top of the hills.
Wow.
Because it was more cost effective for them to buy a new machine, have it shipped to the base of the next mountain, and pull it up from there, rather than hook 2 teams of oxen on and try to pull it down the hill and lose control and lose the machine and the animals at the same time. Cheaper just to buy a new one. So you move forward a couple years, 1923, you got the Skagit yarder down there on the end. That's a gasoline powered rig. Well,